Here's the thing about dinosaurs, they weren't alone. There were millions of animals living right next to them, eating with them, hunting each other. But when an asteroid wiped out 75% of all life on Earth, some of those animals just survived. Why? Most people think the extinction wiped out everything dinosaur-related, but that's not what happened at all. Today, we're going to answer one of the craziest questions in science. How did mammals, birds, reptiles, and insects manage to stay alive when the most dominant creatures on the planet completely disappeared? And trust me, the answer is way more interesting than they were just lucky. Size mattered way more than species. Here's where most people get it wrong. When that asteroid hit 66 million years ago, the impact wasn't just massive, it was absolutely catastrophic. We're talking about an explosion equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. But here's the thing, the creatures that died weren't randomly chosen. There was a pattern. And that pattern had everything to do with how big you were. Animals that weighed less than about 25 kilograms, that's roughly the size of a large dog, had a dramatically higher survival rate. Why? Because when you're small, you need less food. When the dust blocked out the sun for months and temperatures dropped, smaller animals could survive on insects, dead matter, and whatever scraps they could find. Meanwhile, a T-Rex needed to eat thousands of pounds of meat every single year. Without fresh prey, these giant predators were basically running an impossible bill they couldn't pay. Scientists from UC Berkeley studied fossil records and found that nearly every land animal over 25 kilograms went extinct within a few years of impact. Underground was the ultimate survival bunker. Now, here's something that blows people's minds. The animals that survived best weren't necessarily the smartest or the fastest. They were the ones hiding underground. Mammals that burrowed, like early rodents and shrews, had an incredible advantage. When the sky turned black and temperatures plummeted, these creatures could retreat into their burrows where soil actually acts as insulation. The ground temperature doesn't drop nearly as fast as the air temperature. Research from the University of Alberta found that burrowing mammals had survival rates up to 5 times higher than non-burrowing species. These weren't sophisticated animals. We're talking about creatures maybe the size of a mouse or a hamster. But that underground lifestyle? That was basically a time machine that let them skip past the worst part of the disaster. They'd emerge weeks or months later to a completely transformed world, but they'd made it. Flying was your best ticket out. Here's what's wild, birds didn't just survive the extinction. Birds are dinosaurs. We call them avian dinosaurs now because that's literally what they are scientifically. But why did birds make it when their massive cousins didn't? Flight. Think about what happened immediately after impact. Ash, dust, and debris filled the atmosphere. But small, flying creatures could move. They could escape regions hit hardest by firestorms. They could follow surviving insects and seeds over longer distances. A study published in PNAS showed that early birds had several survival advantages. Smaller body size, faster metabolism that allowed them to adapt quickly to food shortages, and the ability to fly to areas where conditions were less extreme. Plus, and this is key, birds didn't need a ton of food compared to their size. A sparrow-sized creature from that era might eat maybe a few grams of insects daily. Finding that amount was possible. A dinosaur? Not possible. Water was the highway to survival. Here's something people rarely think about. What happened in the oceans and rivers? While land animals were suffocating under volcanic ash and freezing in darkness, aquatic creatures actually had better odds. Water provides insulation. It shields organisms from radiation. And most importantly, aquatic ecosystems had a completely different food chain. Fish, amphibians, and aquatic reptiles like early crocodilians survived at much higher rates than land animals. A study from Yale University found that freshwater ecosystems actually fared better than saltwater ones because they were more isolated, and some could rely on thermal vents or geothermal heat. Crocodiles, which are basically living fossils, made it through because they can survive on virtually nothing for months. They're like the tanks of the animal world. One crocodile can wait years between meals. The creatures in water didn't depend on sunlight for energy like plants and plant eaters did. They had more flexibility, more options, more ways to survive. Speed of adaptation changed everything. Here's the real kicker, and this is what separates the survivors from the extinct. How fast animals could adapt to insane changes. The animals that made it through the extinction had one thing in common. They were adaptable. Rats, mice, frogs, turtles, snakes, these weren't super specialized. A T-Rex was a perfection machine for one thing, hunting large dinosaurs. But what happens when large dinosaurs don't exist anymore? That perfection becomes useless. A rat, though? A rat can eat plants, insects, dead animals, seeds, fungi. A rat's a problem solver. So here's what we know. The animals that survived the extinction were small, often hidden underground or in water, could fly or move quickly, needed less food, and weren't relying on one specific survival strategy. They weren't the strongest, they weren't the smartest by our standards, but they were ready for catastrophe in ways the dinosaurs never could be. The dinosaurs' extinction wasn't about strength or intelligence. It was about flexibility, size, and luck. And the animals that had those things? They inherited a world with almost no competition, and that's how they became the ancestors of everything we see today. Subscribe if you want to learn the wild stories about how other animals beat extinction, because this story happens more often than you'd think.